Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open one of the most influential and controversial books ever written, Sigmund Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams. And we're going to explore the hidden corners of your own mind. Okay, so let's get into this. But you know what? Before we even talk about Freud, let's talk about, well, us, and some of the really strange things our brains do every single day. I mean, think about it. We've all been there, right? You have one of those dreams that is just so weird you can't even explain it. Or you make a slip of the tongue. You say something you absolutely did not mean to say. What do these little glitches actually mean? And where in the world do they come from? Well, for Freud, these weren't just random errors. No way. He saw them as clues, like little breadcrumbs being dropped by our own minds, pointing toward this vast, hidden world that's operating just beneath the surface of our everyday awareness. So, what was Freud's big, radical answer to the mystery of all these mental glitches? Well, it was an idea that would completely change how we think about ourselves. And there it is. That's the bombshell. This single idea was a profound shock to how people thought. The notion that your conscious thoughts, the you that you think you know and are in control of, are just a tiny, tiny fraction of who you really are. The real master of the house, Freud said, is someone else entirely. He called this hidden part the unconscious. And the crucial point here is that he wasn't just talking about things we kind of forgot. He argued it's this dynamic, active place where we forcefully push down or repress all the primal urges, the socially unacceptable desires, and the painful memories that we just can't handle consciously. And this is just a brilliant way to picture it, isn't it? He imagined our mind has this kind of protective skin. A powerful shock from the outside world, a trauma, could literally tear that skin, allowing all the chaos of the world to rush in and disrupt our hidden internal world. It leaves a wound that keeps affecting us, long after the event is over. Okay, so if the unconscious is this hidden, locked-off world inside our minds, how could we ever hope to explore it? Well, Freud believed he'd found a secret pathway, and that pathway was our dreams. Now, this is where things get really, really interesting, because Freud completely flipped dream interpretation on its head. For centuries, people looked at dreams as prophecies, right? Messages about what's to come. Freud comes along and says, nope, you're looking in the complete wrong direction. Dreams aren't about the future. They are a bizarre, symbolic stage where our past gets to act out its deepest, unfulfilled wishes. And this is so crucial. Freud insisted that there is no universal dream dictionary. You can't just look up what a tower or a key means. A tower in your dream might mean something totally different than a tower in my dream, because it's built from the raw material of your unique life, your memories, your repressed desires. It's a personal code. He figured out that our dreams are basically cobbled together from the day's leftovers. You know, a stray thought, a scene from a show you watched. That gets mixed with real-time signals from your body, like a car alarm outside or an upset stomach. But the most important ingredient, the one that gives the dream its real meaning, is the psychological stuff bubbling up from that deep well of the unconscious. So to make this hidden world a little more concrete, a little more understandable, Freud later developed a kind of map of the mind. He described these fundamental forces that are pretty much always at war within us. At the very core of our unconscious, he put the id. The easiest way to think about it is as the raw, impulsive toddler that lives inside all of us. It's pure instinct. It's home to our most basic drives for survival, aggression, and pleasure. And it wants what it wants, right now, with zero regard for the consequences. And then you have our conscious self, the ego. The ego is like a super stressed out manager who's constantly trying to negotiate. It's stuck in the middle. On one side, it's got the wild, impulsive demands of the id screaming for attention, and on the other, it has to deal with the rules, limitations, and consequences of the real world. And that constant, exhausting negotiation, that's the source of a lot of our anxiety. So why on earth does any of this still matter over 100 years later? Because Freud didn't just propose a new theory about the mind. He delivered a fundamental shock to humanity's entire self-image. You know, Freud himself put his own discovery right up there with Copernicus and Darwin. He saw it as the third great blow to human ego. First, Copernicus told us we weren't the center of the universe. Ouch. Then Darwin told us we weren't specially created, but were just part of the animal kingdom. Double ouch. And finally, Freud delivered the knockout punch. We aren't even the rational masters of our own minds. And this completely new way of seeing the mind totally revolutionized how we treat mental health. Before Freud, mental illness was often seen as some kind of physical problem, and it was treated with these brutal, really ineffective methods. Freud pioneered the talking cure, this radical idea that simply talking, accessing those repressed memories, and making the unconscious conscious could actually be a powerful form of healing. And all of this leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought, one that's just as powerful today as it was in Freud's time. If you are not the true master of your own mind, who is? Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to try and unlock one of the most influential and, controversial books of the entire 20th century, Sigmund Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams. I mean, of course you have, right? We all have. And for pretty much all of history, these little movies that play in our heads at night, they were either seen as messages from the gods or, maybe just a bad burrito. But then, in 1900, this doctor from Vienna, Sigmund Freud, he publishes this huge book with a totally radical claim. He said dreams weren't just random brain static. No, he argued they were a scientific window, a peek into the deepest, hidden parts of the human mind. Okay, so his whole theory, this entire monumental work, it actually rests on one revolutionary and kind of deceptively simple core idea. An idea that would completely change how we think about our own minds forever. All right, let's really break this down. This single sentence, this is the key to the whole 700-page book. For Freud, this wasn't just about dreams. This was like the master key to unlocking the human psyche itself. So in the simplest terms, what he's saying is that every single dream, no matter how bizarre or even how terrifying, is at its core a form of wish fulfillment. Okay, but that raises a pretty big question, right? If dreams are just wishes, why are they so weird and confusing? I mean, why not just dream about winning the lottery or, eating the perfect pizza? Well, this is where Freud's theory gets really interesting. And to get it, we have to take a little tour of the mind itself. So, to explain all that weirdness, Freud had to come up with a map of the mind. And he developed this incredibly powerful metaphor for how it's all structured, one we actually still use in our language today. He asked us to imagine the mind as a house, with a main floor and a deep, dark, locked basement. So think of your conscious mind as the living room. It's the well-lit part of the house. It's where your everyday life happens, all your logical thoughts, your interactions. It's the part of you that's listening to me right now. But then, below all that, lies the unconscious. This is the locked basement. And it's where we shove everything we just can't deal with. Forbidden desires, traumatic memories, aggressive urges, basically all the stuff that society tells us is ugly and unacceptable. Right, and it's super important to get this. These thoughts aren't just forgotten, like where you left your keys. They are actively repressed. They're pushed down and locked away because, frankly, they're just too disturbing for the polite company up in the conscious living room. Now, here's what happens. When we go to sleep, the guard of our conscious mind, that logical part of us, it starts to relax. It gets drowsy. And this is the moment when those repressed wishes from the basement start to creep up the stairs, trying to break into our awareness. But there's a catch. There's this mental censor that's still standing at the door, kind of like a bouncer at a club. So to slip past this guard, that raw, ugly wish from the basement has to put on a costume. It has to disguise itself. It twists and turns into something symbolic, something weird, something totally unrecognizable. And that disguise? Well, that's your dream. So this all leads to a massive question, doesn't it? What kind of desire could possibly be so powerful, so universal, and so forbidden that it has to be the very foundation of this whole crazy system? For Freud, the answer was crystal clear: the Oedipus complex. He looked at that ancient Greek tragedy of King Oedipus, the guy who unknowingly kills his father and marries his mother, and he argued it wasn't just some old story. He said it was our story. It was the story of everyone. Now, what's really fascinating here is that Freud didn't see this as some sort of sickness or dysfunction. He actually argued that successfully repressing this desire, burying it deep down, is an absolutely crucial step for a child to form a family, to identify with their same-sex parent, and ultimately to enter civilized society. I mean, it's a wildly provocative idea, to put it mildly. And it was so controversial that it ended up causing these huge fractures with even his closest and most loyal followers. Yeah, this intense laser focus on repressed sexuality being the root of, well, pretty much everything, it was bound to lead to some very famous, very messy breakups in the psychoanalytic world. And that's exactly what happened. It led to this fundamental split. You had his student, Alfred Adler, who broke away and argued that the core human drive wasn't sex at all, but the will to power, this constant struggle against our own feelings of inferiority. And then you had Carl Jung, who went in a totally different direction, proposing this idea of a deeper, more spiritual, collective unconscious that we all share. Okay, so we have to be really clear about this. Today, modern psychology has pretty much moved on from Freud. His theories are heavily, heavily criticized. Why? Well, for being unscientific, basically impossible to prove or disprove, and for being just deeply rooted in the biases of his specific time and place, 19th century Vienna. And here is a fascinating little fact. Freud was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Medicine multiple times, but he never won it. But then, in 1930, he was awarded Germany's highest literary honor, the Goethe Prize, a literary prize. So why? Why a literary prize? Well, because whether you agree with him or not, and a lot of people don't, he fundamentally changed the very language we use to talk about ourselves. His work wasn't really science in the way we think of it now. It was more like a powerful, epic news story about what it means to be human. And that story had a profound, absolutely undeniable impact on 20th century culture, from art and film to just how we talk about our feelings with our friends. I mean, just think about it for a second. We talk about the unconscious all the time. We talk about repression, trauma, the ego. We even joke about a Freudian slip when someone says something by accident. All of these ideas, which were born from his deep dive into dreams, they're now just part of our shared toolkit for trying to understand ourselves. So maybe Freud's greatest challenge to us wasn't that he had all the right answers. In fact, he probably didn't. It was that he dared to ask the questions in the first place. He invited us to look past the weird, nonsensical surface of our dreams and to wonder, just for a moment, what secrets might be hiding down there in our own locked basements. All right, let's dive into one of the most influential books ever written, Sigmund Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams. I mean, this is the book that basically promised to do the impossible, to crack the code of our own minds while we're sleeping. So let's get into it. You know the ones I'm talking about, those totally bizarre, illogical, sometimes even scary dreams that just feel like your brain is firing off random static. But Freud came along and asked this really radical question. What if all that chaos actually has a point? What if every single weird detail is a clue, a piece of a hidden puzzle sent from a part of you that you don't even know exists? See, before Freud, dreams were usually dismissed as, messages from the gods or just meaningless brain farts. But Freud, he treated them like a crime scene. He saw himself as a kind of modern-day Oedipus, solving the riddle of the self. He was convinced that if we just looked closely enough at the clues in our dreams, we could uncover the deepest, most hidden truths about who we really are. And the key that unlocked his entire theory? Well, it actually came from one of his own dreams, a dream that was so important it became the absolute centerpiece of his work. It all revolves around a patient he called Irma, and it started with a moment of good old-fashioned professional anxiety. So here's the scene. Freud's been treating this young woman, Irma, but the results are just, okay, not a home run. Then, a colleague, a guy named Otto, just casually remarks that Irma is, quote, better, but not well. Now, for Freud, this isn't just some offhand comment. It's a jab. It's a critique of his skills, and it stings. He feels defensive, maybe a little guilty, and he goes to bed that night with all this tension just bubbling under the surface. And that night, this is the dream he has. He's at a party, he corners Irma, and basically tells her, hey, if you're still in pain, that's on you. Total blame shift. Then he decides to look in her throat, and he sees this weird white patch. And then, out of nowhere, other doctors just appear. One of them, a really respected guy, takes a look and confirms Freud's diagnosis. And then, and this is the best part, they all conclude that Irma's problem was caused by a dirty needle given to her by Otto, the very same colleague who criticized him. Then he wakes up. Okay, so for you or me, this would just be a weird, jumbled dream, right? But for Freud, the detective, every single one of those bizarre details was a clue. He started to unpack them one by one, using this technique he called free association, just to see where each symbol would take him. And this is where it gets really brilliant. Let's look at the clues. Irma resisting in the dream, that made Freud think of another patient who was difficult, which conveniently helped the dream paint Irma as the problem, not his treatment. The weird lesion in her throat, well, that tapped into Freud's own worries about his health, and it cleverly made Irma's problem a physical one, not a psychological one. Again, not his fault. And the senior doctor who backs him up, he kind of looked like Freud's respected older brother, which added a layer of family authority to his opinion. And the final masterstroke? The dirty injection. It pins the entire failure squarely on Otto, the guy who made him feel bad in the first place. So through this process, Freud figured out these key ways our minds work when we dream. The first he called condensation. It's basically how a dream is super efficient. It's like packing a whole suitcase of anxieties, memories, and people into one tiny little symbol. That superior doctor wasn't just one person, he was a mashup of a colleague and his brother, concentrating all their authority into one figure. The second trick the dream mind uses is displacement, and this one is so clever. Look, Freud felt guilty. He felt like a failure, but that's a tough feeling to face head on. So the dream performs this brilliant bit of mental judo. It takes all that intense emotion of blame and displaces it from himself onto a much safer, much easier target, his colleague, Otto. The dream basically found a scapegoat. So after following all the breadcrumbs, after mapping out the dream's bizarre but undeniable logic, Freud finally reached his verdict. He had cracked the case of the Irma dream, and in the process, he believed he had discovered the fundamental purpose of all dreams. And here it is, the big reveal. The entire complicated, strange, and seemingly random dream was cooked up for one very simple reason. It wasn't just noise. It was there to fulfill a wish. And this idea became the absolute cornerstone of his whole theory, wish fulfillment. The idea is that every single dream, no matter how weird or even how terrifying, is at its core an attempt by our unconscious mind to satisfy a desire. It's usually a desire from our waking life that got frustrated or pushed down. So at night, our mind puts on a little show just to give us what we wanted. And the Irma dream is the perfect example, isn't it? It was a wish fulfillment machine. It fulfilled his wish to be innocent, to be totally blameless for Irma's condition. It fulfilled his wish to get revenge on his critic, Otto, and maybe most importantly, it fulfilled his wish to feel like a competent, confident doctor again. The dream was basically a PR team for his ego. And he started seeing this pattern all over the place. He had another famous dream when he was anxiously waiting to be promoted. In the dream, his two main rivals for the job were shown to be a fool and a criminal. It's another wish fulfillment. The dream was telling him, don't worry, they're not getting the job because they're losers, which conveniently cleared a path for his own success. So, case closed, right? Dreams fulfill wishes. Simple. But as Freud kept digging deeper and deeper, he found a final twist in the road, a complication that makes this whole thing even more interesting. It brings up a question not just about our dreams, but about the very nature of memory itself. Okay, so we know the unconscious uses the raw materials of our lives to build these dream stories. Our memories, our fears, all of it. But what if those memories aren't reliable? What if the past isn't some fixed videotape that we just play back? What if it's something else? You see, Freud's early idea was kind of like the past as fact model. Something bad happened, it got stored away in a vault in your mind, and it causes problems later. But his later work hinted at something way more radical, that the unconscious isn't just an archive, it's an active storyteller. It's constantly rewriting and re-editing the past to help us make sense of our present. And this leads to a really mind-bending insight from his later work. He basically said that when it comes to healing, it might not even matter if a memory is factually, historically true. What matters is the story the person believes about themselves. The psychological truth, the conviction, can actually be way more powerful than what really happened. And here's why that is so incredibly important. Because if our past isn't a set of unchangeable facts carved in stone, but is actually a story we're telling ourselves, well, that means we can become the editors of that story. We can learn to reinterpret our own past, to change the meaning of old events, and, in doing so, free ourselves from their power over us. Which, of course, brings it all right back to you. Freud's great, incredible insight was that our dreams aren't just random static. They are stories. They are wishes, they are defenses, they are deeply personal myths written in a language of symbols. They show us the stories we're telling ourselves about ourselves every single night. So the only real question is, are you listening? All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most fascinating ideas in all of psychology, Sigmund Freud's theory of how our dreams are made. We're going to step inside the mind's secret workshop. Have you ever woken up from a dream and thought, what on earth was that? Just a totally chaotic jumble of faces, places, and feelings that makes absolutely no sense? Well, Freud argued that there's actually a hidden logic to all that madness. You see, he believed that dreams are anything but random noise. He called them the royal road, basically a secret pathway into our unconscious minds. This is where our deepest and often our most forbidden desires hang out. These are the kinds of thoughts and wishes we keep pushed down, suppressed when we're awake. So the big question is, if these wishes are so forbidden, how do they get into our dreams at all? Well, they have to sneak past this really tough gatekeeper that Freud called the censor. Just picture a mental bouncer at the door of your conscious mind, and its only job is to block anything too shocking or taboo from getting in. So yeah, these wishes can't just stroll through the front door. They need a really clever disguise. And that leads us to the secret journey every single dream thought takes. It starts out as this raw, unconscious wish. Then bam, it hits the censor's roadblock. From there, it has to go into a kind of disguise workshop. And it's that workshop, what Freud called the dream work, that we're going to break down right now. Okay, so the very first tool the dream work uses to build these disguises is something called condensation. And really, it's just the art of combining, merging, fusing a bunch of different ideas into one single thing. The best way to think about it is like a zip file, but for your mind. The dream work takes this massive amount of hidden meaning, we're talking multiple people, different memories, all sorts of anxieties, and it compresses all of it down into one single, super efficient symbol. And this is why those people in your dreams can feel so familiar, but also kind of strange, right? That person you dreamed about last night, they might not be one individual at all. They're probably a mashup, a composite figure that's packed with all your thoughts and feelings about several different people from your life. All right, let's get into the second major tool, and this one is even more cunning. If condensation is all about packing things together, displacement is all about swapping them around. Okay, now this is the dream's absolute masterstroke. See, the censor is always on the lookout for really intense emotions pointed at forbidden people or ideas. So what does the dream work do? It performs this incredible psychological sleight of hand. It keeps the strong emotion, but it just changes the subject. And boom, the censor is completely fooled. So you might have a dream that seems to be about some tiny trivial annoyance, right? Like, I don't know, losing your keys. But that dream could actually be carrying all the emotional weight of a huge fight you're having with your partner. The real issue is hidden in plain sight. Let's actually look at a case study to see exactly how these tools work together to pull this off. Okay, so this example comes straight from Freud's work. It's about a middle-aged woman and a desire so deeply repressed, so unacceptable, that the censor would absolutely never let it pass. All right, so here's the secret, the raw, hidden thought, what Freud would call the latent content. It's a huge taboo, something the censor would shut down immediately in its raw form.
So what happens? The dream work has to get really, really creative, and the transformation begins. Now just look at how systematically the dream takes apart and swaps every single element. First up, the forbidden target, her father, gets replaced by a much safer one, her son. Next, the forbidden action, the desire, is replaced with something innocent, like dancing. And then, for one final layer of disguise, the dreamer herself gets swapped out for a total stranger. And this is the final result. This is what Freud called the manifest dream, the dream you actually remember. The hidden wish gets its moments, it's fulfilled symbolically, but the surface of the dream is now totally safe. It can enter her conscious mind without setting off a single alarm. The disguise is absolutely perfect.
But wait, the dream work doesn't just stop at swapping images. It's got another trick up its sleeve. It can use clever wordplay, puns, double meanings, things that sound alike, to sneak even more meaning right past the censor.
Okay, so this one patient was really troubled by two separate things. On one hand, he heard this horrible story about a guy named Captain Dick. And on the other hand, he felt incredibly guilty because he secretly thought his girlfriend was overweight. Now, these two anxieties seemed totally unrelated, but they got linked together in his mind through language. And here is the linguistic trick that connects everything. In German, which was the patient's native language, the word for fat is Dick. It sounds exactly the same as the captain's name that was causing him so much anxiety. So his unconscious mind just grabbed onto that pun. It took all the intense, aggressive feelings he had about the captain and displaced them, shifted them over onto a safer target, his obsession with his girlfriend's weight. It's amazing, really. The dream work used a simple pun to pull off a really complex emotional swap. So, okay, after all this incredibly complex work of condensing and displacing and disguising, you have to ask, what's the point? Why does our mind go to all this trouble night after night? Well, for Freud, the answer was actually pretty simple. Wish fulfillment. That's it. He argued that every single dream, no matter how bizarre or boring or even terrifying it is, represents the fulfillment of a repressed wish. Think about it. The dream gives us this safe, symbolic place to let out our deepest desires. That releases all this pent-up psychological tension, and maybe most importantly, it lets us stay asleep. By disguising these disruptive thoughts, the dream is literally protecting our sleep. It's like a guardian for our mental peace. So when you get right down to it, dreams are basically a compromise. It's a masterpiece of psychological diplomacy, really, a negotiation that happens inside your head every night, where both sides win. The unconscious gets to act out its forbidden wish in disguise, and the censor succeeds in keeping your conscious mind totally unaware and peacefully asleep. So what this all means is that your dreams aren't just random static. They're messages written in your own private symbolic language. And once you start to understand the tools of the dream work, things like condensation and displacement, you can actually start to learn the grammar of that secret language. And that really is the big question Freud leaves us all with. Your dreams are not random. So what are they trying to tell you? What secrets are just waiting to be decoded? Thanks for watching.